state middle. Sounds good.
All right. Oh, do I have to?
Yeah, you'll need a mic. Yeah. It's on. It is live.
It's definitely just me talking.
Yes, and it's going to be you going through the system.
It's a live stream. Let's see how many people are listening. All right, guys. So welcome. Thank you all for coming. I'm Dan Porrick. I'm the principal at Liberty. So we're right here on campus. You guys coming out today is a big deal for us. We were just talking to our guys out here. You know, this is the first event that we've done is like a corridor with 3 buildings, a nighttime event. So we're excited about it. We're hoping that you guys get something out of the message. Such a big topic. It's a 2-hour event, but we can be here all day. And we have been all day.
Yeah, we have been.
Prairie School. So if you guys have all had your kids come through that, we're down the block a little bit. But in terms of SEL and social emotional learning, I'll repeat myself a little bit from what we talked about this morning, but one of the things that we do and we try to make sure that the kids here every day are very much looking for success. I am kind, I am safe, I am responsible. And you know, if I'm ever talking with students, or if you know my assistant is ever talking with the student, or social worker, or teachers are talking about students, we talk about how were you kind, safe, and responsible, or how were you not kind, safe, and responsible. And that's one thing that we've asked through newsletters and when we talk with parents is asking you guys to have those conversations too at home as well. How are you kind, safe, and responsible at school? We know that we need to teach them what our expectations are. So what does being kind, safe, and responsible look like on the playground, in the classroom, in the lunchroom, at gym, in art, in music? So we teach them those expectations and then reinforce them. Obviously, in terms of SEL, all of our teachers are also on a weekly, daily basis teaching lessons. We try to interweave some learning throughout reading, writing, those ELA subjects to make sure that the students are hearing about social emotional learning on a regular basis. So hopefully those things start to sink in and they're internalizing some of the things that we're talking about in some of those lessons on a regular basis.
Wow. All right. Actually all 3 buildings were fortunate to go to a PBIS. So what Jeff was talking about as far as like explicitly teaching in different areas of our building. We've been able to send a committee of teachers out there to be trained on PBIS and then bring it back to our buildings, and we did that within the district. We were the first ones to do that. So we've just to build off of what Jeff said, we try to focus behaviors and emotions within the teaching and learning lens, and we never make assumptions about what kids do, what they know or what they don't know. So we really try to parallel social emotional learning to academics. If a kid struggles in reading, we teach. If a kid struggles in math, we teach. If a kid misbehaves, most of the time we say, do we punish or how do we handle that? And so we try to face it the same way. We teach. Behavior is communication. So when a child has different types of behaviors, they're communicating to us in some way. So those are the conversations that we have with our teachers, and then that trickles down in the conversations that they have with our students. So and we can go on and on, like I said, about different types of interventions that we have, but we don't want to steal the show either. So here's Kevin.
All right, so thank you guys for being here this evening. So at Jerling Junior High School, we have grades 6, 7, and 8. And so those of you who have children at Prairie and Liberty will see that there's a continuum of what is being done in the undergrades. We use the second step program here at our school, and one of the things that's a little bit more unique about our school is that we hit the brakes on everything during the academic week, and every single kid is learning about social emotional learning at the same time. And so all the teachers, all of the adults in the building are involved in that, including our crosswalk person, okay? And so we bring in people from the community as well. We invite people to join those second step lessons to kind of reach outside of the school. So very excited to do that and just to continue the work of what Prairie and Liberty is doing. We also do work, of course, with PBIS. We're working with the SEL interventions. We have an SEL team. It's a social emotional learning team. So long story short, it's a lot of learning is going on. Because so many things are changing in education, in the social emotional learning component is really one of the more new aspects of what we do at school. And so we're really, really excited to have our two gentlemen in here, Dr. Tim and Dr. Tom, to give us a great presentation tonight. So just wanted to say that it's great to have you guys out here. Just check the metrics on YouTube. We have 10,000 viewers. So, we invited that many people. So, Dr. Tom.
Great, thank you. That's awesome. And we're no nerves at all about 10,000 people watching. We've just been so thrilled to be here all day long. It's been a real pleasure and a joy to get to learn more about this school district and the work that's happening in these buildings, to meet the kids, to meet the staff, and I really just, we felt it was important for these three principals to get up here and tell you what's going on actually in this school before we started talking about SEL in general. And I have to tell you, it is the leadership of these teams that you've got here, who we've spent a lot of time with today, that really impressed us, and we feel really honored to be a part of this now. And so we felt like the team today, certainly in all the work we were doing, and what an incredible day. We've had such a great day already. And we're excited about being here tonight. My name is Tim Dorr, and I am the director of the Master of Science in Education program at Northwestern University in the School of Education and Social Policy there. So that is I oversee the teacher training program of elementary, middle, and high school teachers, as well as a teacher leadership program that we have at the university. I spent 23 years previous to that at New Trier High School, where I was a teacher, an English teacher, and a teacher leader, and 5 years as principal of our Winnetka campus, where there are 3,000 sophomores, juniors, and seniors, along with about 500 staff members. So a big job, but one that I absolutely loved, and I think had a big impact on some of the work I'm doing today.
And my name is Tom Nobieski, and I'm a social worker, and I've spent all of my professional career, which is a little over 40 years now, working in schools. I was, for the majority of my time in schools, I was the social work department chair at New Trier, and Tim and I got to work very closely together, particularly around at times when students were struggling in school. A lot of times around crisis response, but the day-to-day operations of being engaged with 3,000 teenagers on a daily basis. I retired from New Trier in 2013, and I'm currently involved in teaching both at Northwestern, but also at Loyola University School of Social Work. And I'm also involved in doing some consultation with schools around social emotional learning, climate issues, and as Tim, I'll echo what Tim has said, it's been very exciting to be with you all today. I'm very impressed to hear all of this.
Tom and I have been spending the last 5 years literally traveling the state, doing work with school districts all over the place. We get the great opportunity to work with teachers and sometimes parents and students around these issues related to mental health, school climate, and social emotional learning. And one of the reasons why we mention that, and one of the things we'll bring up tonight, is I think it's useful to sort of think about your school and also think about what's happening in other schools. And we'll try to relate some of the things we've seen happening at other places and to sort of bring your school into contrast with those other schools. This is a topic on social emotional learning that everybody is buzzing about. Everybody is focused on. There's incredible research just exploding right now in this field. And schools are figuring out how to do it. And everyone does it a little bit differently, and I think the good news is what we're seeing here is that there's a lot happening here, and it's exciting to see. And so it was part of that story is to say there's a lot of good work happening here, and I think that's our goal is to help continue that movement and that momentum that we're seeing. tonight's really exciting because we really want this to be informative and interactive. So there's going to be a little bit, we will do some work with each other and with yourself tonight. We want to give you some strategies. We're hoping that actually you walk out tonight with a couple of things that you can go home and use with your kids, with your partner, with family members and colleagues, that you'll actually learn a couple of things tonight as well. But we want to start by really getting us thinking about some terms and some ideas. So tonight we're going to give you an overview of social emotional learning. We're going to focus on two of the skill areas of self-awareness and self-management. And again, we're going to try to help you think about your own goal setting of what you would want to do going out of here tonight to continue to work in these areas.
So one of the concepts that we're going to organize some of our focus and discussion upon tonight is mindfulness. John Kabat-Zinn has been doing mindfulness-based work for about the last 10 to 15 years in the Chicagoland area, and had a definition of mindfulness as paying attention in a particular way, on purpose, in the present moment, and non-judgmentally. So we're going to be focusing upon both the skill of self-awareness and then social awareness. But if we just unpack that a little bit, it's paying attention in terms of being present. So it's focused attention with open monitoring, but also doing it in an intentional type of way. So we're going to spend some time with you unpacking and exploring mindfulness-based practices, both in terms of communication, but also considering stress and the impact that stress has upon our mind, body, and brain. So we're going to kind of start with a very short video, and some of you may be well aware and familiar with the Disney movie Inside Out. We're going to show you a brief clip that illustrates some of the concepts that we're going to be talking about today in terms of the role of emotion, the impact of communication upon relationships, and stress.
Director of Instructional Technology, Chris Mahula.
There we go. All right.
So, how was the first day of school? It was fine, I guess. Hold on. Do you ever look at someone and wonder, what is going on inside their head? Did you guys pick up on that? Sure. Something's wrong. We're going to find out what's happening, but we'll need support. Signal the husband.
Uh-oh, she's looking at us. What did she say? Sorry, sir. No one was listening. Is it garbage night? We left the toilet seat up. What? What is it, woman? What?
Signal him again.
So, Riley, how was school?
For this, we gave up that Brazilian helicopter pilot?
School was great, all right?
What was that? I thought you said we were gonna act casual.
Riley, is everything okay?
Sir, she just rolled her eyes at us. All right, make a show of force. I don't want to have to put the foot down. No, not the foot. Riley, I do not like this new attitude. Attitude. No, breathe.
What is your problem? Just leave me alone.
Sir, reporting high levels of sass. Take it to DEFCON 2. DEFCON 2. I don't know where this disrespectful attitude came from. You want a piece of this, Bob?
Yeah? Well, look.
Prepare the foot. Keys to safety position. Ready to launch on your command, sir.
Just shut up!
Fire! That's it. Go to your room. The foot is down. The foot is down. Good job, gentlemen. That could have been a disaster.
Well, that was a disaster.
Go.
So one of the things we're framing this as tonight is mindful communication, is thinking about how we communicate with our kids, but also how we communicate with each other, And you know, this is one of those things where these SEL skills that we're going to be talking about really come into play, because when we can engage in these SEL skills, we can suddenly begin to engage with each other in a different way. So we know that you've had, you know, some familiarity with the SEL skills, and you know, you can think about them in this way as we start talking about it. You all should have a handout that's got the SEL wheel at it, some other, and so you don't have to take notes during the presentation. There's sort of crib notes there and some good resources. But this is sort of one of the constructs of when we think about SEL is through this wheel. And you can think about it in terms of sort of pairing together self-awareness and self-management, social awareness and relationship skills, and then decision-making. So we're going to talk really quickly through each one of these. So self-awareness is the ability to recognize your emotions and values, as well as your strengths and limitations. And of course, you know, oftentimes it's easy for some of us to identify our limitations without being able to recognize our strengths, and vice versa. But this is really about, am I in touch with how I'm feeling, who I am, how I'm doing? One of the ways that we ask kids to engage in this is to, anytime we have them do any self-awareness activities, we're asking them to reflect on how they're feeling, how they're doing. This could be journal writing. There's lots of ways we can do this in schools, and lots of ways we can do this at home. Self-management, once we have that self-awareness, is the ability then to manage our emotions and feelings, not just, we say it's not controlling them, and it's not limiting them, it's managing them. And being able to do that in order to achieve my goals. And we do this with students by helping them through problem solving, planning. Anytime we ask kids to make a plan for what they're going to do next, is a great way for them to practice self-management. So those two kind of go together. Self-awareness, self-management definitely work closely together. We're going to explore them in a little bit. The other area then begins, once I'm sort of aware of who I am and how I'm feeling, I can then begin to look at the people around me. And so self-awareness, social awareness is this ability to have empathy, to understand things like facial expressions, body language. Again, these begin to be more sophisticated things. Little kids have more difficulty developmentally, understanding the difference between maybe angry and frustrated. So that's something that we can work on with children. Great way to do this at home is with picture books. So when you're reading your favorite book, to stop and say, point to a character in the page and say, what do you think that puppy dog is feeling right now? Or what do you think Elmo is feeling right now? Or whoever it is at the moment. I have a 3-year-old, we're very into Paw Patrol right now. And so I'm always asking, what does Chase think? What does he look like right now? So, anytime we do that in schools, we do that a lot, both with picture books, but also as the kids get older with literary characters, literary figures, is a great historical figures, asking them to put themselves in the shoes of a historical figure is a great way to sort of understand what others are feeling and thinking. And then this one is the next step, right? It's being able to then form a relationship with the person that we're trying to interact with, and how do we deepen our relationships? How do we get to know each other? How do we get to communicate? How do we work together on teams? This is a huge part of that process. And look at all the ways that we do collaborative work in schools, on the courts and the athletic fields, and on stage. All these great ways that we do these kind of relationship building skills. And of course, in classrooms, what we're trying to do is we actually teach kids those skills. So we teach you how to be a good group member. We teach you how to deal with conflict. Because whenever we have collaborative work, we're going to probably come into some kind of conflict. And you think about how important this is. You think about what we do in our workplaces, what we do in our organizations, what we do in PTOs and things like that. We work with other people. And so our ability to get along with each other and build relationships is really important. And in fact, it's critical to start developing those positive, preventative, and restorative resiliency skills is oftentimes through having a caring relationship. Right? So that's a really important one. And then the fifth part of our SEL skills is responsible decision making. That ability to make good decisions. This becomes important when kids are young, but certainly as they get older, it becomes even more critical as the stakes maybe get a little bit higher. But there's lots of ways we can give students opportunities to make good choices and to learn from the problem solving activities we might have them do. And that's everything from if they're playing a game, or if they are working on a puzzle, or they're doing something that's sort of an activity in school where they have to figure out how to, lead. These are all great opportunities to do responsible decision making. Why are these SEL skills important? And why are we here talking to you tonight? It's really this. We have study after study after study that happen. It feels like it's every week. I'm reading about another study that says basically the same thing. And that is this. When we have a school that has taken a conscious approach to teaching these SEL skills, everything we want to see get better in a school gets better, and everything we want to see go away goes away. Not completely, but in any case, but it certainly has a big impact. So what do we see reduced? We see conduct problems go down, we see aggressive behavior reduced, and we see levels of emotional distress go down in these schools. And what do we see increase? Self-perception. My self-perception gets better. We see more positive classroom behavior, which includes things like school climate results get higher and higher. And then these two are really important. What we absolutely see is an improvement in student learning, however we measure it, whether it's by grades or standardized tests. Generally speaking, right now, where we are is up to an 11% increase in test scores on students. Students are in schools where they have the social emotional learning, skill building curriculum. And there's lots and lots of great research on this. Like I said, it's being replicated over and over and over again. I was mentioning today, the most recent study I read looks specifically at science and looks at student grades and student learning and student achievement in science. And it's a 9% increase in students' understanding of science just because of a social emotional learning curriculum. So tonight we're going to spend a little time delving into two of these. We can't do it all. We're going to pick these two. And they're usually the ones that most people start with because they start with the self, and they're more personal and they're things we can work on right here. But we're going to do a little bit of also relationship building and empathy, so we're going to delve into the other two as well. But we really want to have you focus tonight on thinking about where you are in the areas of self-awareness, right? Being aware of those emotions and my effect on others, and self-management, my ability to manage my emotions and behaviors. We're going to ask you to engage in some thinking about that tonight. And I would say, before I hand this off to Tom, is that one of the really important reasons why we want to do this is that having these abilities ourselves and doing them well is really important to our kids. And so we know that when parents are feeling comfortable with their SEL skills and teachers feel good about their SEL skills, that has a major impact on the students and our children. So it's good for us to be working on it as well as our kids.
So we want to spend a little time talking about what disrupts self-awareness and self-management. So let me put that question out to you in terms of your thoughts of what might interfere with our capacities to be aware and to manage what it is that we're experiencing.
Hiding.
So one behavioral expression, as we were talking about earlier, is we often communicate through our behavior, and fighting is certainly one way of letting people know that something's bothering you.
For sure.
Other thoughts?
Stress.
And we're going to spend some time unpacking the different aspects and components of stress.
Like attention issues like ADHD.
So ways of focusing our attention in terms of things that interfere or preoccupy our mind, either in terms of a distracting kind of way or in an obsessive ruminating kind of way. And certainly when our mind is overly active, our attention can be all over the place.
Nutrition.
So we're going to also kind of spend some time talking about some very basic needs. So if you're not eating well, or if you're hungry, you're certainly not going to be at a place where you're going to be able to have focused attention.
Yeah, I think sometimes if you're feeling a lot of stress, you might, maybe a disconnect or you're quiet. You're like, oof, maybe you would go home and be like, if you had a hard day at work, I don't know what I'm trying to say, but
Patient.
yeah, you kind of,
For sure.
distant, right, act a little distant.
So every time we feel stress, we feel an emotion. And so we're going to be spending some time focusing upon emotion, stress, anxiety, and trauma. But to think about what are some of the kinds of problems we have when we are not attending to what we feel. So a part of that is we may kind of be disconnected and detached, disengaged from what we feel. We may feel a feeling but express it in the wrong way in terms of that type of disconnection. We may shut down or withdraw. So we want to spend a little time kind of focusing upon and thinking about emotion. So, a definition of feelings. Let me start there and give you. Emotions are particular kinds of automatic appraisals influenced by our both universal and personal past. It includes a set of physiological and psychological change in behaviors. And they begin to deal with the situation and help us to prepare to respond to important challenges and opportunities. So to unpack that a little bit, it's a cognitive appraisal system. And it's an appraisal system that tells us about something that is important to us, something that's meaningful. And the different feelings have different, I referenced universal triggers as well as our own personal past histories. So universal triggers would be things that have been encoded in our evolutionary DNA for millennia. The automatic response system that our body reacts to when we perceive threat or danger. So emotion is also a process. It's a process of experiencing. So physiologically, if I were to ask you to kind of think of a particular emotion and some of the more intense, the kind of bigger feelings that we may be feeling, even if they're temporary, are anger, fear, sadness, surprise, joy, contempt, disgust. And as an emotional process, often we aren't necessarily stopping and attending to what we're feeling, but we're reacting to it. So think of physiological cues that we have, because part of an experience of emotion serves a social function. So if you have experienced a loss and you're sad, part of your facial expression shows people around you that of what your experience is. Or if you're angry, usually our eyebrows go up, our face has a scornful look. But so we communicate both verbally as well as non-verbally, but we also have a physical signature within our bodies around an emotional experience. So thinking about the role and function of emotion and how and in what ways you both attend to it, but also the ways in which you communicate feelings. So the focus that we're creating in terms of spending time talking about emotion is there are often moments where we experience emotion and we get caught up in the experience as opposed to being reflective. So if you were to just, I'll ask for a moment, ask you to kind of identify a feeling that you felt today. I'm not going to ask people to share, but just to kind of locate an experience that you had today, a feeling that you had today.
Frustration.
It could be any one of countless possibilities. Like one way that I sometimes frame thinking about emotion is the difference between being colorblinded and having color vision. So when you're color blinded, you see the world in black and white. But if you have color vision, you see a whole spectrum of the rainbow. And feelings have a similar type of, it's another way of framing emotion and feeling. So frustration being one. So as you think about your experience today, before you felt that feeling, you were in some type of mood. You've had some type of day. You either got up on the right side of the bed or the wrong side of the bed. You either felt hurried or you felt relaxed. That sense of a precondition. And preconditions are, multi-determined depending upon, are you feeling harried? Are you feeling relaxed? Have you been calm? Have you been frustrated, agitated? But it's what is leading up to an event. And events can trigger us. They can trigger us in a lot of different kinds of ways. And events can stir up in our mind something that is real or perceived, expected, unexpected. But thinking of what that trigger is and framing the trigger in terms of the next step. And the next step is, once you are triggered, what's your perceptual database? So it's like the cognitive appraisal part of it. So as you're working through the event that I asked you to think about this morning, or sometime today, is what was the feeling? What led up to, what was the experience that triggered the feeling? And what was the event? So our perceptual database is twofold. One is physiological, and the other is mental or psychological. So when our body has a lot to tell us in terms of an emotional experience. And so with whatever the feeling was that you identified, how did you locate it within your body? Like, what was your body telling you about feeling stressed? Now, what was your somatic signature of anger, of fear, of sorrow, of sadness, of joy? So I'm dissecting this to illustrate the complexity of what goes on in our minds and our emotional life. Like in the Inside Out movie, the 5 characters basically were 5 feelings interacting in the moment in response to a triggering situation that was interpreted in 3 different ways. And the breakdown in communication. So a part of that trigger is knowing what you're experiencing physiologically, somatically, but also knowing and recognizing what it is that is occurring within your thinking about that situation. So all that has led us up to a point where you're most of the time unconsciously, but collecting all this data, and then you are faced with where we want to be is a choice. So, and again, with today's experience, how intentional and how focused were you upon making a choice about what it was that you felt? Now, a lot of this is happening automatically, but it's that choice part that we want to underscore. It's like recognizing the spark before the flame. So, when we are at a place of choice, we have basically one of 3 options. And the choice is constructive, destructive, or ambiguous. So your example was?
Me.
No, you're not. No, you said you gave a little bit of an elaboration upon an example, like behavior.
Oh, I did?
Now, when you started.
Maybe.
Well, you said frustration.
Oh, okay.
But when we started. So.
Fighting.
Fighting.
Oh, yeah. When the kids are fighting, yeah.
So when the kids are fighting, how much of it may have been an automatic appraisal of that situation, but how much of a choice was taking place there? It was more of a reactive.
Yeah.
And when people are angry, it's often about feeling they're wronged in some kind of way. And so one response is to get aggressive and get in the fight zone.
Mm-hmm.
More often than not, a destructive choice because somebody's going to come out of it being hurt.
True. Yeah.
And but that would be, one example of a destructive choice. The other is focusing upon the integration of thinking and feeling at the same time in order to make constructive choices. So one set of ideas is, as you think about emotion and pay attention to what your own experiences are, as well as how you can coach your children in terms of their experience of emotion, to be able to kind of frame it in terms of helping to make constructive choices. Because the last part of this is post-condition. And post-condition is, what are we left with? What is the outcome of what we have experienced? So emotion is a process. It's about automatic cognitive appraisals. It's about being in touch with something that's objectively meaningful to us, and that all emotions are informative. So I mentioned anger is a way of kind of being kind of thwarted or being kind of limited from pursuing something that you want. Another would be an example of fear. And fear is about the sense of harm and feeling vulnerable. So we wanted to provide that overview a bit upon emotions as we kind of move into stress. So as I mentioned earlier, all stress has to do with an emotional experience. And to make some distinction between, and the definition of stress is your body's way of responding to a threat or danger. So, the stress response. There are two ways of viewing stress: eustress and distress. Eustress is the positive experience of stress. Distress is something that is more taxing and a negative experience of stress. But it's our body's response to threat or danger. So we experience a whole wide range of stressors over the course of a day, a week, a month, a year. So, and stressors can have a variety of impacts upon the person. So if I were to ask you to think about the course of this past year and what were stressful events that you had experienced, we would come up with a very wide range. In fact, next week, if you have all the kids at home and you don't have too much planned, you probably are anticipating a stressor. Or if you're going on vacation and you haven't packed and you have a flight at 5 o'clock tomorrow, you're probably already preoccupied in terms of how am I going to get all this done in time to get. So stressors are these neutral life events that we all experience. The way we experience is unique to who we are. And we have a background, a backstory to it in terms of how we manage stress and stressors. But the part that we want to underscore here is how our bodies experience stress, and particularly how our brains experience stress. So if you were, and we'll have a visual a little later in our presentation in terms of stress and the impact upon not only the body but the brain. Our nervous system is one of the systems in our bodies that kind of is an organizing system that kind of communicates what our internal organs are experiencing, and it kind of sends the information up to our brains in a variety of different kinds of ways. But the three parts of the brain that I'd like to underscore are the prefrontal cortex, the amygdala, and the hippocampus. The part of the brain that deals with executive functioning, the part of the brain that deals with emotion, the fire alarm of the brain, and the part of the brain that deals with memory. Our autonomic nervous system kind of manages the stress response. So when we are feeling some degree of threat or discomfort or unease, the sympathetic part of the nervous system is activated. And the sympathetic part of the nervous system is the gas pedal, is the accelerator of the body. And it doesn't necessarily distinguish between, is it a positive experience or a negative experience? We experience stress as something that is impactful. So when that part of our brain is activated, we automatically go into the fight, flight, or freeze response. It's like the evolutionary encoded DNA. If you're attacked by a saber-toothed tiger, you either are run or you're launched. So that part is when you are in that state of the stress and you're activated, how do you calm the amygdala? How do you kind of work with the emotional center of the brain, and how do you quiet? How do you quiet the mind? So one of the suggestions that we've been talking about today is developing skills and capacities for self-regulation. So one very simple strategy is if you take 3 really deep belly breaths, breaths that really kind of ground you and kind of release the tension that you have. And you do that in a purposeful way, that's going to recalibrate your body. That in itself isn't enough, because the other part is if we name what we feel coupled with that response, we're then able to activate the other part of the brain, which is the air traffic control system of the brain. And that's the part of the prefrontal cortex that manages executive functioning. And executive functioning skills are decision-making skills, problem-solving skills, reading situations, managing kind of frustration and impulse control, those types of skills. So knowing that when we are stressed, our body doesn't necessarily discriminate unless we kind of can calm it and then access thinking. The other part of the autonomic nervous system is the parasympathetic part of the nervous system, which is the part of our nervous system and our brain functioning that is the rest and digest system. So anytime you experience or feel a positive feeling, and a positive feeling would be joy, pleasant surprises, altruism, gratitude, generosity. That part activates, is the counterbalance to negative stress, to experiences that are distressing. So we're underscoring the critical importance of attending to emotion as it has an effect upon our bodies and our brains. So any questions about that very broad, brief overview of the mind-body-brain connection?
So deep breathing, name the stressor, and then what's the connection to the positive?
The connection to the positive is it frees up your system to access the prefrontal cortex, in that it kind of...
But how do you do that? Like, what would you suggest doing? So if my kid's freaking out and I have him breathe deeply a few times, which I've done, then and then talk about what's bothering him.
Name the feeling.
Right.
And then to talk about what's bothering him.
And then how do you switch that to the last part?
Well, that is the last part.
That will connect.
That
Once
connects.
he's able to release the negative, basically, is going to help him connect back to the positive.
So the other concept that is linked to what we're talking about is being in the optimal zone of functioning or tolerance. It's often called the window of tolerance. So when we are in that zone, we're fairly well regulated. The danger becomes when we get in a hyper alert or a hyper aroused state or a hypo aroused state. So a hypo aroused state would be when we're shut down, when we're disconnected, when we're detached, when we're numb, we've lost energy, we're kind of listless. And that's also a stress response. It's the freeze response. But when we are hyper aroused, we can get loud, we can get overly active and attentive, we can get belligerent, we can get demanding, we can get testing, we can get aggressive, all kinds of. And so the task is bring the person back into that zone where they're regulated. And what the role of adults are during that time is to be a co-regulator. So it's like, thinking about how does your child experience stress? How do they let you know if they're upset? So one is what's the fingerprint of how they deal with stress? And so in knowing that, then it's the communication piece. It's helping them not to just identify what they're feeling, but also to process it. And to process it in a way of, I mentioned our brains don't easily discriminate, is the threat or perceived danger real or imagined? It's like we've been talking on and off today about technology. When that ding goes off on your phone, it activates the same part of the brain as somebody who is close to you and says that they either love or hate you. That we're in an activated state. And that part of it is how then do we find this balance where we can then access thinking. And that question of balance becomes the critical component, is how do you think and feel together to make good choices and good decisions?
I think it's interesting, the belly breathing of the 3D breaths. And I just from my own experience, I do that much better as a principal than I do as a parent. As a parent, I want that immediate answer, for my kids. Where if I'm at school, I have no problem saying, okay, I'll give you some time. And there's a big difference. The kids at school respond a lot better than my own at home. So I think that's something that I need to practice, at home too. Is you take a breath, and I need to as well. As the adult. So.
And I find too after they take that breath, sometimes mine to just to nag to I want you to respond and answer me.
Yeah,
but actually, when he goes away and does, just processes, and I let him be, he'll come back to me and say, "I'm sorry, Mom, that I this and that."
Wow.
So he well, we worked on that, but he. I mean, that happened when he said, "What did you experience this morning?" It was this morning. He was really worked up and really frustrated. But he did. Later on, he came back on his own accord. Mom, I'm sorry that I
think what we're identifying here too is the developmental difference, like how I respond to things as an adult versus how an 8-year-old or a 12-year-old responds, are very different things, and sometimes they surprise us. But we're all in different places, and then you identified my different roles that I play. I wear a lot of hats during the day. Sometimes I'm the driver in the car, and I'm angry at the people around me, or I'm getting angry at the people around me, and sometimes I'm dad, and sometimes I'm this professional, I'm a son, or whatever it is, right? And that may have an impact on how I, respond to stress and these things.
So, if we view emotion as this process that informs us that something is going on that impacts our welfare. And as I asked you to think about what was going on in the event to you today, and you were sitting with the feeling, and did you think about the emotional tone of what you were experiencing? So did you like it? Did you dislike it? Was it something that you were indifferent to? Or was it pleasant, unpleasant, neutral? So it's the subtlety of some of those experiences that we sort of just take for granted as we kind of go on our day-to-day basis, and sometimes it's about being automatic. But knowing what your child's triggers are and how knowing what your own triggers are, and it's sort of there, and then in what way does your child get triggered, and then how do you kind of find that way of getting back into balance? That idea of co-regulation, which is what happens in a classroom all the time, is that when teachers are well balanced and focused and calm, and somebody is disruptive or dysregulated, and they help that student to kind of get back to reestablish some balance and some calmer focus and perspective, there's a quiet response. We wanted to kind of mention stress in 3 different kinds of ways. One is positive stress, which is stress it's that eustress. It's stress that's challenging to us, but we rise to the occasion, we mobilize. There may be opportunities for creativity, for productivity, for effective communication, but we rise to the occasion even though there are mild elevations in our stress hormones in our response. Tolerable stress is serious temporary stress and stressors that have impacted us, but the antidote is they're buffered by supportive relationships. And a supportive relationship is the child who has a protective relationship with one warm, caring adult who helps them to kind of navigate into problem solve. The danger is in the experience of toxic stress, which is a prolonged activation of the stress response in the absence of a protective relationship. I wanted to mention positive, tolerable, and toxic stress, because when we are under significant stress and it's cumulative and it builds up, what we find ourselves moving frequently to is a state of exhaustion and the experience of collapse. It's like that the wear and tear has worn us out and we're worn down. So when we are experiencing toxic stress or cumulative stress, one of the things that we're also experiencing is our body is activated and we are in survival mode as opposed to a mode of thriving. So, any questions about any of those three categories? So, I wanted to spend some time talking about anxiety, and we have, on the slide, a feeling of worry, nervousness, or unease, typically about an imminent event or outcome. So, like stress, we all experience anxiety. We all have moments where we are uneasy, when we're nervous, when we're worried about something that may be happening in our lives. So it's typical, it's common, it's part of our day-to-day lives. But when does anxiety become a problem? So that's a question I'll throw out to you, is when does anxiety become a problem?
When you can't function, yeah.
When it interferes with our current functioning. And current functioning is not just about school or schoolwork or work. It's also about play. It's also impacting social connections. So it impairs parts of our lives in a way that is inhibiting or disabled.
How do you get rid of that?
The answer, positive emotion. That's an overly simplistic answer, but it's one of the ways, it's one of the stress reducers in terms of when we have the experience of positive emotion, it's the kind of the medicine for this stress. But that's only one part. But what are other signs of when does anxiety become a problem?
Affects your health.
When it affects your health, your physical health.
Doesn't seem to be ending.
When it seems endless, and there's a sense of either shutting down or overly getting caught up in it.
Relationships.
When it interferes with the quality of relationships that we have with people we love and care about, with coworkers, with coming to work, with any number of ways we relate to other people. So what would you look for when anxiety becomes an illness? Because we're framing this as a continuum. We all have anxiety. Mm-hmm. When does it interfere, and how do we kind of reframe and recenter ourselves? But what are signs to look for when anxiety becomes a mental illness?
Depression, avoiding situations.
So you're shut down. So social isolation. The psychiatric language around it would be a social phobia.
Changing your norm with what your normal behaviors would be, like when you're interacting with someone thinking they're not themselves consistently.
So that would be one of the warning signs, and it's particularly, like, we all get moody every now and again, but when is it prolonged?
I think when it stops you from doing things that you enjoy, which would counteract anxiety, right? You just said that, if you enjoy your
Part
joy
of the antidote
is
is finding joy.
yeah, it sometimes stops you from doing that, right?
Mm-hmm. So when it interferes and stops you from doing things
you do.
So some of the language, the diagnostic language around anxiety disorders would be kind of social phobias, kind of obsessive compulsive disorder, panic disorder, separation anxiety disorder. So it's when they reach a threshold where there's a significant interference in the capacity and the ability to be engaged in the day-to-day life routines. And, you know, it's at those moments where there's another level of intervention that needs to go beyond just kind of focusing on breathing and some of the other activities. So as we're thinking about this, one of the things we asked earlier today is, how many of you have a self-care plan? This is a show of hands. So one timid hand. Okay, so now I am going to put you on. So what's your self-care plan?
Oh, for myself, for my child.
For you.
For you. Oh no, I don't have one.
I take it back.
I'm getting to the answer to your question. So what is yours?
Okay, so I try to breathe. I try to take minutes out. Is this what you
No,
mean?
no, I only chuckle because that's one of the things we all do, right?
Right, yeah. Not a big deal. Yeah, I don't breathe correctly, I should say. I try to take minutes for myself. You know, I never used to give myself some time, but now I do. I meditate. I am aware. I'm more aware now of the moments where it's happening for me when I get frustrated. So I can kind of calm myself, just take a step back. I'm more apologetic if I get frustrated with kids.
You know, so that idea of an intentional and explicit self-care plan is a critical component of what we're talking about here. And it's
It took toxic stress to get me here. Just so you know, not like literal survival mode to get me to where I'm like, hey, I gotta take care of myself. You know?
You know, we have all kinds of motives that lead us where we
For
need to
sure.
go.
It shouldn't take that long, but it did.
It's better on being on this side, but that's
100%, 100%. And the kids are thankful for it too. Yeah. Yeah.
So, you know, in terms of how do you think about establishing not only balance in your life, but what does a self-care plan look like? And it is something that is intentional and explicit. It also needs to be unique to who you are and what works in terms of your own kind of lifestyle and the values and attitudes and beliefs that you have. But it's one of having balance around practicing good health. Now, the harder question around this is, how many of you have a mental health action plan? And what might that even look like? You know, in terms of a mental health action plan.
I mean, sometimes I get anxiety and I already feel it, and I'll even tell him, like, it's gonna happen. I'm like a panic attack. I need to go, and he'll just take over, and he'll take over the kids, and I'll just go lay down on the couch or just kind of plug my ears. It gets like really so that helps.
But that's the intentional awareness of being able to label what you feel.
Yeah.
And then you access the other part of your brain was, this is what I need.
Yeah.
I need to detach, I need to disconnect, I need to kind of lie down for a few minutes. But you needed something, and that was the other part of the plan. But, so in terms of framing, a self-care plan is also framing, what do you do to take care of your mental health? Sometimes we find that like we're going to go off vacation and I'll do it then. But by the time we get to vacation, there's been a cumulative build-up.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it's a small thing, like, if you're really having a day at work where you're like, you know it when you're like, okay, I had to function all day like here.
Yeah.
I can't go home and do my normal routine.
Yeah.
You sometimes have to have a plan B, like, which was yesterday. Like, okay, I'm not cooking dinner. McDonald's it is.
Yeah.
I'm not, so you kind of have to somehow, you have to make your life enjoyable.
For sure.
Right?
Yeah.
Somehow.
But it's that intentionally,
oh yeah,
it's that paying attention to present moment experiences in order to kind of harvest joy.
And it does balance it out, right? So, I mean, I was like,
Yeah.
the stress level was like, oof.
For sure.
I can't go home and clean up.
Yeah.
I can't go, we had a good time last night, so it worked out. And then today's all better, yeah.
But, so
Self-management. Yeah.
when I referenced that emotional timeline earlier, that moment of choice becomes critically important.
Yeah.
Because the response, there are one of three responses: constructive, destructive, or ambiguous.
Well, you don't want to go home and then, I don't know, you walk into a mess and then, or whatever, anything can happen, right?
Yeah.
Normal stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because I knew I was operating like here.
Yeah, so you're aware of it.
Yeah.
That's good. That's good, right?
And it's the awareness part that leads to the choice. You know, that would be the part that I would underscore in terms of thinking about emotion. Emotions tell us all kinds of things. If you really kind of sit with it and distill, what is the feeling telling you? You know, for example, fear. Fear tells us about vulnerability, that we have something that we have some stake in the moment.
Or danger.
And danger. So even when you think of fear, you know, there's a whole wide range of labels that we could use to talk about fear, like apprehension or terror. I mean, but it's a feeling word that describes the same family of feelings. And you know, so in terms of distilling and discerning, you know, how do you dig into something? You know, one is, I think the best learning we have often is within ourselves. So how and what way do you name and label what it is that you feel as a way of then kind of managing and regulating what it is that you feel? Because that information, that identifying the feeling is basically the first step. The second step has to do with processing. And we process either internally within our own heads or we process with other people, but that processing piece becomes this way of, and again, these are automatic processes that they're happening like in microseconds. But if you slow it down and you really distill and discern and dig into it, you have this opportunity to be able to then name it in terms of why, not only what is it that I'm feeling, but why am I feeling the way that I'm feeling, what do you mean? Because then it's the third part to complete that cycle is the process. How do you process feelings? You know, and more often than not, we are so far, we're removed from what we feel, unless we're purposefully paying attention and we're really sitting, or we're kind of really jarred in some kind of a way that captures our attention.
It's hard not to it's hard not to react. It's kind of physics, right? I mean, it's hard not to just put back what you feel like is coming at you. You know what I mean?
I know exactly, but what I'm also saying.
Well, I'm not saying you should, but it's your natural response to do it.
It's automatic appraisal system.
Yes.
You know,
I'm not saying it's the right thing. Well, you have to stop yourself.
But it serves a purpose. It's like when you are crossing a busy street and you're about to take a step off the sidewalk and a car is moving down in front of you, you don't stop and think, you just automatically respond. So there's that survival mechanism that kicks in, that's automatic. You didn't have time to think and your body kind of just took over. But there are also opportunities where we do have time to think, but we are disconnected from what it is that we might be feeling. So when my emotion become a problem is like when you're not paying enough attention to it and you're expressing it in the inappropriate way, or you're feeling a feeling but identifying it in the wrong way, like for example, being hurt but expressing your hurt as anger, you know, those types of things. Or when we begin to kind of internalize the feelings and it affects our physical health. It kind of gives us ulcers and headaches and high blood pressure and all those things. So the point is, one is we have this universal appraisal system, but we also have a learned appraisal system in terms of our own past history, in terms of how we've learned to deal with a certain kind of feeling in a certain kind of way. So this discerning process begins to shift that with that idea of choice, we're moving from reaction to reflection. And that's the part that you want to integrate, like being able to think and feel at the same time. But you know, we're not usually practicing that, and so where did we learn all this? Beginning to learn it in schools through SEL, but we've learned it in our families in terms of how we've been taught to experience and express feelings in a certain way. So underlying the importance of emotion, but the other part that we were talking about is what interferes with self-awareness and self-management has to do with this next side, which is trauma. An event that can seriously disrupt our lives, a student's normal life and routine, it threatens a person's feelings of safety and well-being. This is an area that we're learning an awful lot more about in terms of how trauma affects us. You can watch the news on any given night and go, and after you show that you've been traumatized. The unique quality of trauma is that the event kind of isn't extraordinary because it happens. It's extraordinary because it taxes our capacity to cope. It exceeds the resources that we have in a way that overwhelms us. So we spent some time earlier today talking about a phenomenal study that's been around for the last 20 to 30 years, and it's the ACEs study. Are folks familiar with the Adverse Childhood Experience study? It would be something to kind of take a look at because the research is indicating that it's the #1 public health issue facing America today. And it has to do with traumatic events, and particularly childhood trauma. So we're framing stress, distress, toxic stress, cumulative stress, post-traumatic stress, and this other area in EDGE is complex stress. And when we are reacting to a traumatic state, our brain doesn't necessarily fully go online. So we're more often in a survival mode than in a thriving mode. And that's where adult protective relationships come in, is because it helps children to kind of process their experience and to work through what it is that they feel. But being aware of different kinds of events that may be traumatic for us is critically important. And we talked earlier about a fundamental question being is not so much what's wrong with you as what's happening to you, as a way of reframing and reintegrating. So feelings, anxiety, stress, and trauma were 4 of those areas, four components, 4 characteristics of something that interferes with self-awareness and self-management. So that awareness piece becomes critical.
So all this happens inside the brain, and this is a toddler's brain. We can maybe imagine a brain being like this, where they're sometimes we think this is what's going on. This is the wine region here. Here's Elmo, cartoon addiction lobe, which for my daughter is, like I said, Paw Patrol and Elmo right now for sure. But we know that there's a lot going on inside the brains of our kids, and that's one of the incredible, joyful things about watching kids develop and grow, is just how amazing we are as human beings from the time we're born. And I said all the way through 24. And this is actually kind of amazing and scary at the same time that we know that adolescence actually continues on into the early 20s. Post-college, right? It's going to be here for a while. And I think about, I was a teacher at 22. What was I doing? What was I doing with my kids? But this is, this is how it feels, that this is what's going on. There's so much going on. There's so much happening. We know that, dendrites are being rewired at different points. And this is why sophomore students just fall into their chairs in a class for no reason. Or they walk into walls. My daughter, I have one daughter, one of my many daughters, who's 11, and it's classic Becca, because I turn around and she's on the floor. She's just fallen over, or she's bumped into something. This is who she is. We want to give another resource. We give you lots of resources. There's books up here, by the way, incredible resources here, and some other places we're going to talk about that you can have access to. And if there's a book you really like, you can put your name up here on a sheet, and the district is going to be able to buy you that book, which is fantastic. So check those out. This is a great book by Dan Siegel. Dan Siegel is somebody who would really suggest you go and check out if you're interested in this brain research, and he's really great at explaining it and describing it. This book on the whole brain child is a fantastic sort of way to get us to understand what's going on. And Dan says teachers really need to become brain research experts, because when we have that in our repertoire as teachers, you can really do some amazing things with kids and the things we do in classrooms. But certainly for parents, this is a great thing too. So we give you that suggestion to think about. So what we want to do is we want to actually get you practicing some of this. So we're going to ask you to indulge us for a few minutes. We're not going to take too much time on this, but we do want to give you at least a couple of experiences and a couple more ideas before we end tonight of things that you can engage in your own work as a parent, but also as a partner, as a son, daughter, whatever it might be, as a colleague. This is great practice. So in order to do this, we're going to need you to be in pairs. So if you are not paired up with somebody, you need to get paired up with somebody. I love that there's some couples who came tonight. This is going to be great. Free therapy for So what we like you to do, friends, we're gonna make friends tonight. Just for the next 10 minutes or so, or 15, maybe 10, 15 minutes, we want you to be make a new friend tonight. So what we need you to do, and you can actually get up and move if you want to make this space. It'd be actually helpful if you're not right next to each other. We'd actually like you to take a chair with your new friend, introduce yourself, make a new friend, and face each other. You physically have to change your arrangement. I will model. You need a chair and a chair. Facing each other. Could be a new friend. This would be a great moment. Maybe it's safer to do it with someone you don't know. Might be safer. Make a new friend. And when we see some parents together, use the chairs here in front of them. Actually, get like knee to knee, facing each other. Facing each other. We're almost there. Okay, we are almost there. Introduce yourself, say hi. Good, all right. Okay. We're going to give you some instructions on what we'd like you to do. All right, so you want to do this? You're going to take this? Go ahead, give us the instruction.
So as Tim has already set it up, first of all, decide who's going to go first.
Yeah, who's going to go first?
I'll be brave. So this is in this exercise, we're focusing upon a couple of different things. One is establishing presence. Presence as a form of mindful communication. And then we're also kind of concentrating on the skill, the SEL skill of being an active, engaged listener. So in a moment, we're going to kind of ask you to, well, we'll set it up by asking you to think about a situation that you recently have had with a child, your child. And we're going to present it to you as a choice. It could be a stressful situation and it was a difficulty dealing with tension. Or if you had a joyful situation and really would just want to seize and take this opportunity to talk about that. So we're going to give you, for the person who's starting to talk, about 30 seconds to kind of call up a situation that comes to mind, a feeling that you had. And it could be the one that is stressing and conflicted, or one that has been positive and joyful. But call it up because we're going to give you some.
So you're just thinking right now. So do a little thinking. What are you going to say? What's going to be your story? How are you going to explain either this joyful thing that's happened or this frustrating thing that's happened?
So listeners, stay connected to your partner by your presence. And presence is it's not just listening to the words, but it's the body language. How are you going to convey to the person that you're really there with them? And then as you listen, you're listening not just to the words, but you're listening for meaning, and you're listening for feeling. But and another way of framing that is you're listening in a wholehearted kind of way. So you're going to listen. The speaker and listener is the listener is silent during this time. So the speaker has, and we're going to give you 2 minutes of undivided TLC, tender listening care. And then we're going to kind of stop in 2 minutes and then give you one other instruction before flipping roles. Okay? So everyone has their role identified, has the story in mind. Okay, do you have your watch set?
I do.
Okay, so 2 minutes.
2 minutes. Tell your story.
next part of this activity is for the person who has been speaking, is to tell their story again, but this time slow it down. And between thoughts or sentences, breathe and take a moment of pause. But to retell your story, but in a way that is paced differently. And then we'll give you 2 more minutes. And then we're going to debrief.
So listeners, continue to listen, open listening, TLC listening. The speaker now is going to tell the story again, but maybe in a slightly different way.
But with the use of pause.
We didn't say this is going to be.
So, the last part of this particular part of this exercise is to the listener. What did it feel like to hear this? And to the speaker, after hearing the listener, did you feel heard?
You feel hurt?
Heard. So, and then, as you answer those 2 questions, to have a moment to also process and brief what you talked about.
So there's a chance for you to have a conversation now about what you heard and what it was like to be in the listener. So go ahead.
And I only have
is asking with the same guidelines and same principles, that as you are an actively engaged listener, you are closely attending to your partner, you're establishing presence, you're listening not to what the words are, but also what they mean and what they're feeling, and you're giving them the gift, and the gift is undivided attention. So we're gonna process it in the same kind of way, 2 minutes, and at the end of 2 minutes, we're gonna ask you to pause, and then after the pause to tell your story again, but to slow it down and to see what the experience is like. Okay, so so for the person who's speaking this time, we'll give you a few seconds to just gather an experience that you want to talk about, and again, it can be either something that's joyful or something that has been kind of frustrating or conflictual or upsetting related to your child. We set the timer?
Ready?
Okay.
Go.
So we started this exercise, we framed it as the power of presence. But in this next section, when we asked you to slow it down and tell your story once again, we were focusing on the power of pace and the power of pause. In terms of really sitting with what the other person, what you're saying, but also what the other person is saying. So that's what we've been practicing. So in the last part of this last segment is again, if you were speaking, to tell your story again in a pace that is kind of practicing pacing and pausing. So we're going to give you 2 more minutes, and then we'll be brief for a minute, and then we'll process this.
Go ahead, tell your story.
So I was asked by my
The last part, 1 minute to your brief experience in terms of what it was like. What it was like your story and somewhat bring it full circle in terms of what you're talking about. So we'll give you 1 more minute to do that, and then we're going to debrief it as large group. So, first question is what was it like to have the undivided attention of someone who is actually engaging and listening. What was it like to have someone whose undivided attention focused upon you, and that was all they had to do in the moment, is just be present with you and hear what you had to say and vice versa. So,
yeah, I realize how lacking that can be in a busy family. Like how that just sometimes, like I'm just like thinking about how often I've actually sat down and talked with my wife like that without having distraction, this. It's rare to have that kind of conversation. Yeah, like rare.
I think it'd be really beneficial, like we were just talking, we're both moms and teachers. So we're looking at seeing how it would affect us as teachers to talk to our kids in class, and then our kids at home, and then how we would do it with other adults. As talking to a kid, I think it would be very beneficial for them because they get that uninterrupted attention to get to express how they feel. As an adult, it's a little bit harder because I feel like when someone is just listening, I appreciate the nods, I appreciate the yeses, but I also need that connection of, I have a story similar to that too. Like I need that support of, yep, I've been there, I've got it, or I'm just as confused as you are. Like that to me helps to calm me down. But I definitely can see that when I try to spill those kinds of stories to my kids, depending on their age groups, it takes away the importance of what they're trying to figure out. So, yeah.
It's knowing the opposite, it's knowing the audience with the task, but also to being able to know what the need is in terms of, as an adult talking to your loved one or a friend, there's a very different set of needs you may be kind of communicating than if you're a teacher in the classroom and communicating. But what we wanted to underscore was the value and the importance of active, engaged listening. That a sense of how do you establish presence, and presence, in the moment of feeling is the other person feels it. So there's no place else to go, nothing else to do. This is the most important thing I could be doing in this moment. What a gift! And how infrequently do we take or make the opportunity to do that? And then the other part is when you are active listening, it's about hearing the words, but it's also about paying attention to the feelings, getting some sense of what does this mean to this person, and being able to communicate. One of the other things that we didn't talk about in the brain was mirror neurons. Mirror neurons kind of convey to the person that we're communicating with that we're attentive and we're attuned and we're attached. But that part of that practice of the power of presence and the power of pacing and pausing.
With the pausing too, I feel like that's you know, we talked about kids being able to process what we're talking about, like, because we get heightened and we start to talk fast, and so by reminding ourselves to pause as we're reflecting or debriefing with the child, that gives them the chance to digest everything that we're saying, you know, and sometimes we don't think that way. So it was a good reminder to pause when we speak.
And to go on that, I read a book about boy brain and girl brain,
Yes.
especially boys.
Yes.
When their emotions are high, so if they're in trouble in like a school setting or home, they are not processing when they feel emotionally threatened. And so if they feel like they're in trouble and you're asking, why did you do that? They honestly are not able to respond to you a lot of times right away if they have not had quiet time to process.
It's funny, you know, because I have to make calls like that, and the parent will say, well, did you ask him why? And I'll say, he said he didn't know, and I believe him. You know, they don't.
You know, but that processing moment, it's all, well, what were you thinking? What were you feeling?
Yeah.
Tell me more. It's this invitation that I think presence communicates.
And then when you allow them to speak, sometimes they come to it on their own because you're actually giving them the chance to take the time to verbalize it.
So, as a speaker, sometimes she'll be like sending a text message. So I'm talking and I know she's going one hand out.
There's a sign. We're on tape here.
So what I do, like as a grown-up, is I'll just pause and I'll wait till she's done and it's like, hey, can I say something? And we do that as adults back and forth. But if I'm sending a message or something, and one of my kids comes up, like it's, you know, 1,000 miles an hour, and they don't understand that necessarily, you know, maybe the best thing to do is just pause for a second, say, I'd like to say something, and then talk when they have a chance. And I know that it's almost like the kids don't like it. They don't like the fact that they don't have your invited attention, even if it's for 5 seconds at a time. So how do you handle that?
And I only say this because, again, I'm a first year teacher, so I have this a lot. You know, you have a lot of that interruption. They can't comprehend that even though you're having a conversation and you're verbally looking at someone, that they're not being heard at the same time. And so just, again, it was something that I was taught by my parents, that I started modeling the listening and feeling side of it.
Sure.
So I would do a lot of, like when my mom was talking to them, and my mom would tell us to put our hand on her shoulder. And by putting her hand on her shoulder, we're acknowledging to her that we have something to say.
Sure.
And her way of responding to acknowledge that she knows we're there, she would put her hand on ours. And that would be the message to them, that they're understanding that we're busy at that moment, but there's something they really need, and you're acknowledging them for that. It doesn't work all the time, but I do the same thing in school too.
Sure.
And so as long as you're expressing what that means to everybody, I mean, I have some teachers that it's hand on me, I don't know why, but it gives them that clarity, but again, it takes a lot of practice with that and doing it. And my 4-year-old does it now, and she's very good at kind of recognizing when someone else is talking versus my other two, it took me a lot longer to do that. So, I mean, I think, again, it's that simple method of modeling, and.
Well, I can tell you that doesn't go away.
Yeah.
Because I have adult children and a young child, and it was like, a little bit tonight was like mayhem, like, who's talking? Like,
right.
Oh, okay, now it's your turn.
Right.
Okay, now it's your turn.
And being able to do that for them too, like when I have something important to say to them, like if my son is on video games, I will then do the same method to him. I won't just sit there and scream at him, hey, listen to me. I will try to use the same type of response. And again, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but it's just something that was more of a acknowledgement for all of us to.
Never heard of
Right.
it.
Yeah.
I haven't heard of the touching. You know, what I try to do is I'll acknowledge them, not tell them just one side or wait for a pause. But it's still ongoing challenge with that. So maybe we'll try the whole.
The other, one of the other, we're going to mention a book here. We talk about pause and how great silence can be. Ken Ginsberg is a really fantastic pediatrician. This is one of the books we brought, Building Resilience in Children and Teens. He's got a couple of great books. And one of the great pieces of advice he gives parents that they should do is if they really want to learn more about what's going on in the life of their child, especially when they're in the car with them or you're picking them up from school or whatever, is to actually shut up. You actually say to parents, quit talking, don't ask them questions, let them go, let them talk. If you can get through a few awkward moments, You actually learn a lot by just pausing and being quiet, letting your kids come to that. The other piece I would point out, the reason why this is such a great exercise and one that we all need to practice and continue doing is that there's a lot of research around the difference between men and women when it comes to being able to listen and not jump in. That men tend to jump in first in conversations. We tend to not listen as deeply, and it's really hard for us sometimes to sit and just listen. There's also certainly dominant, white culture is there's a lot of research around this, that, white people don't give everyone else a chance to speak, and there's a really important piece here of learning how to quiet our voices, quiet our brains, give other people a chance to speak, and to actively listen. Like that's the hardest thing for us to do because we're trained by this culture to constantly doing this. We actually promote people who think like this. I love The West Wing. It's like my favorite, especially these days, my favorite show. And, it's just a fantastic show. Aaron Sorkin's a great writer, but when you listen to his dialogue, you sort of say, oh, this is the way people are supposed to talk and think like this. That's actually one way of thinking. It's not the only way of thinking. There's lots of ways of processing information. Some of us don't process information that fast. So give me a chance to slow down. Give me a chance to pause. Give me a chance to listen. Give me space. And so we do a lot of work at the university getting kids, teens, and now young adults to think about, don't always be the first one to speak. Maybe that got you here, and you think that's what's been promoted for you, but we really want you to let other people get involved in it. So there's a couple of really important strategies we want to try to practice, and we need to practice these things. That's why we give you this moment.
So, listening with care, being able to ask clarifying questions when you need, and be supportive in that thing. Some of the research around this exercise, I think, was a study out of Harvard where then there was a reference to about 76% of the time, people are much more focused upon what they have to say than what they're hearing. So it's interesting how are we really present.
So think about how might you use this technique yourself? How might your child use this technique? So something you could teach them and start teaching these little strategies and touching and pausing and listening and thinking and being able to be present with each other. And then how might you use this technique in response to your child? So think about how you might be able to incorporate this into your life.
So we're also well aware of the time, so we wanted to underscore the importance of breathing. It's really interesting how we just take this for granted, but we're doing it all the time. But how working with the breath can really be sort of a variety of purposes. One is it can calm us. It can provide space to kind of relax. They're just even in terms of noticing how we experience breathing and various ways we might breathe. So we wanted to reference this, but we wanted to end and move towards mindfulness. And, the image of being mindful or mindful. So we started with present moment awareness in a non-judgmental kind of way. So we wanted to kind of move towards one other exercise in terms of a practice of mindfulness that really requires focused attention, clarity, noticing how your mind works, and to have one other experiential activity before we kind of open it up for questions and wrap things up. So, in this part of the activity, all you have to do is one, get in a comfortable, relaxed position.
That doesn't mean laying down on the floor.
Well, you could, but you might fall asleep.
I would probably say it's okay. So, I will do this with walls.
So, in a regular practice, you want to feel anchored. So, however, in whatever way you're sitting, with your feet grounded or if you're in your chair, to feel supported. So this is an activity that I'm going to just ask you to take 5 really deep breaths, and then it's a counting activity. So the technique that we're going to use in focusing the mind is upon breathing and counting. So with your eyes closed or open, take 21 consecutive breaths and count. notice, and if your mind wanders in the counting, simply notice it and start over. So 21 breaths. So let me kind of bring us back for the moment in terms of what might be the value of this kind of practice. So one is, so a question that I'm always kind of curious about is, how as an adult were you taught to pay attention? I think that is pretty much learned, that people just assume we know how to focus our attention. And sometimes we're directed in one way or another. But a breathing exercise along these lines is an opportunity to teach focused attention. And the focus is upon an anchor that I asked you to consider, and that was your breath. And just to notice what it was like for you to take 21 breaths. And whenever I do this exercise, what I notice is how often my mind wanders. And half of our waking day, our mind is wandering all over the place. Even when we're focused upon something explicitly, our mind has a tendency to wander. So it's like, the realization, recognition of how does your mind work. That's one part. The other part of it is, often when we do an activity and we don't succeed at it, our default mode is to get critical. I didn't succeed, I failed, I couldn't do it, and all kinds of scripts that we may have in our head. But with this activity is, how can you engage it in a way in which you can kind of harvest joy? To just notice that the mind wandered and come back to whatever the anchor might be, kind of re-engage. But a simple breathing activity like this could be one way of teaching self-regulation, teaching kind of focusing skills, helping students to relax, be present, all those types of things. And to build upon it would be, one is, how do you settle your mind, body, and speech? The speech part of it is the script that's going on our head, even when we're sitting there in silence, noticing what's that self-talk all about? And could you just really slow yourself down just to pay attention to the breath? So one is, how do you steady the mind? And then it is, well, how do you settle the mind? And then the task is, how do you steady the mind? And to steady the mind, this was a counting technique that would lead to other techniques like labeling and things like that. But in a practice like this, how do you also cultivate joy? Like, how do you find, I was distracted and I noticed my mind is obsessing about all this other stuff, and all I need to do is be quiet right now and count my breath. Something we take for granted is that we're breathing. But how do we use and work with strategies that help us to kind of calm down and regulate. It's like being in a highly kind of activated kind of setting, having kids just a way of just quiet.
And sometimes we focus on, let's say, count to 5, right? Count backwards from 10. There's all kinds of ways that we do this with kids as well as adults. We talk about the importance of reflection, and there's lots of ways to do deeper kinds of reflections. Journal writing is a fantastic way to have focus and bring focus to what you're doing. So think about ways you can use journal writing. We talked about self-care and the importance of figuring out what do I have in terms of both a physical self-care plan that I'm actually working on doing, as well as a mental health self-care plan. And I'm not just going to respond, I'm actually going to plan for things that will help me with my mental health. And we're leaving you with this really important piece, and we can go on and on about the importance of relationships and how they are both preventative and restorative. They're protective and restorative. This is from Dr. James Comer, who said it very well. No significant learning occurs without a significant relationship. That's true for us as children as it is with adults. And this is what we want to lead with and think about some of these things. What could you do to go practice? What can you do to be, in your role as yourself? How can you improve yourself in all this? How can you improve yourself as a friend, a partner, a son or daughter, whatever it is? And of course, what can you do to improve yourself in these areas? What can you do better as this great person in this young person's life? How can you be this person who can really connect with them deeply and help them grow and help them learn these things? Things that I wish I learned when I was 6 and 8 and 12 and 16. How can we do that in the lives of our kids? At the bottom of the sheet, there is this great little link, which I've made shorter, so you don't have to write gobbledygook too much. It's Bitly, it's a Bitly site. But if you go here, DOOR MH Resources 2019, it's a Google Drive. You now have access to it forever, or until I stop adding to it, which will probably be never. It's got all kinds of articles and resources on many and more of the topics that we're talking about. And we do that too as a gift. We also have these wonderful books up here. We'd love for you to come up and take a look at them, or any that we mentioned tonight. Again, the school is saying if you would like to get a copy for yourself, we'd be happy to help you with that, which is fantastic. We want to say thank you, and also say we're here to answer your questions if you want to ask any questions as you go. But we want to thank you for spending some time with us tonight, and some of you coming back for seconds tonight. So thank you very much, and thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. It's great spending time with these guys because you can just tell that they're very passionate about this topic. Which you guys are all here saying that you're passionate about this topic too. It's a big topic. It's one that we need to talk more about, and we're excited for the partnerships and continuing to do that because this is, if we're going to make a difference, we have to do this together. So thank you guys for being here. We also wanted to mention, so take advantage of this. We're able to fund this through some grants. We're able to bring these gentlemen out and provide books. So look through them, even if the title isn't out here, but it was one that we mentioned. The Whole Brain Child was a good one. I read that one. So if you like that, just write your child's name and your book title, and we will send it home with your child. Okay, so yeah, thanks guys, and we'll be around. Oh, really? Thank you.